Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hidden Hockey Podcast. Again, my name's Matt Gordon. If you're new to the channel, I've gotten a few subscribers in the last little bit from the U17 live stream, so thank you very much. Anybody who's new to the channel, please subscribe to the channel. Please share with your friends. Please allow others to see this content. Truly love talking about draft prospects, international hockey, and the other niches within hockey. So please, feel free to leave any comments. Feel free to, engage with the content. And hopefully you look forward to learning a lot more about the draft. Even if you're watching this live or if you're watching this as a recording, leave a comment. Would love to talk to you about the draft, central scouting ratings and reactions to them, as well as maybe previewing the D1A and D3A divisions for the U20 tournament coming up here in the next couple weeks. So we're going to start off here talking about the central scouting ratings that it came out in late October. They came out. I think it was October 23rd was when they came out. And I'm going to give my just honest reaction based on the prospects and what I've seen so far this year and my overall take on, the book I've developed on a lot of these guys over the last 24 to 36 months on some of these kids. So starting with the A ratings, A rating denotes that prospect is a first-round prospect. We'll start off here with Kashawn Aitchison playing for Barrie. Kashawn is a guy who's a really physical defenseman, somebody who, I think he's bigger than 6'2", listed there. He's going to be your bottom six, your bottom pairing defenseman, somebody who might fit in and might cap as maybe a 4 on a average team in the NHL. This is a kid with some offensive ability. He's got some potential. I really like his overall game and his skill set. But what you're getting out of him is a really, meat and potatoes, very physical defenseman. I have him more of a second round grade, in my opinion. I don't know that he brings that first round quality to his game. But definitely a player that you really would like to see in the National Hockey League, and a guy who's got a lot of projectability within the game and becoming a bit of a defenseman that isn't really seen as much in the younger generation. So he's definitely built himself into something that is going to be interesting to watch going forward. Justin Carboneau has been a late riser through this year, and starting out the year, a lot of people might have had this kid in their third, fourth round. Right now, he's sitting in closer to my late second round for me right now. I still need to see more from him. But he's had a really good start to the year. 5'10" and about, not 5'10", 6'1" and 191, playing in the QMJHL, late, obviously a late born 06. An interesting player that I think is going to have the ability to really shoot up the board here if he continues to play really well through this. Caleb Denoyer, from Moncton. I have this kid solidly in my top 12. Definitely a guy who I think could really slide into the top 10 for this draft. I love his overall game. I think he's super smart, a really good skater as well. But overall, he just brings this really, just very above average to average skill set and all the important things that you need to have to be a National Hockey League player. I'm super excited to see where he goes from here. Victor Eklund's another guy. Victor Eklund is in my top 10. Admittedly, I have him at 6. He's definitely a guy you look at and you watch his game and you really like his overall skill set. He's similar to William. I don't know if he's as good as William is, who's his brother, plays for the San Jose Sharks. But Victor brings his own game and his own skill set and his own potential as well. And I think he will, have the opportunity to really do well. And comparatively to a guy we're going to talk about in a little bit, has done really well at adjusting to the pro level in Sweden. Blake Fiddler just recently got invited to the U.S. World Junior Camp on their preliminary roster, which is a big accomplishment for a draft-eligible player. Very rare to see that happen. Exciting to see. He's got bloodlines with Vernon being a relative of his. As a defenseman, he's a big kid at 6'4" and 210, playing in the Western Hockey League. A later born kid in this draft too. I think a lot of scouts really like the upside here. They think they see a lot of growth within the kid. There's still more to give for him. If he gets that opportunity to play in the World Juniors, I do think that he may get that first round grade to be like really legitimized, and you may see him rise into the top, 12 to 15 range. I'm a little hesitant to put him there. I think there's more that I got to see from him. Anton Frundell has been a big faller in the draft so far this year. I admittedly had him at 2 right under James Higgins to start the year. I dropped him a little bit just based on the injuries. He hasn't been nearly as dominant as you would expect at the pro level in Sweden. Teammates with Victor Eklund as well for Djurgården. And in the Allsvenskan, he is not really playing to the level that you're expecting an elite talent to come and play at. He kind of reminds me a little bit of Capo Caco in terms of what he's experiencing right now as an NHLer. Anton Frundell is a guy who he's got to get over the injury bug. He's got to find a way to just kind of get his groove within the pro level. Obviously, we know he's a dominant junior player. He's going to play now in the World Junior A Championships coming up, which I will do a preview show of that in the next week or so. Just talking about the different rosters for that tournament and seeing what giving some analysis on that as well. But he's a guy who I think is sliding out now, and if he's not careful, could slide even further to maybe being a fringe top 10 guy before it's said and done. Obviously, I'm not going to talk about James Higgins too much. We all know the story with James. James is by far and away the number 1 overall prospect. I don't even think there's a guy near him in this draft right now. I know that's not a commonly held belief in the scouting community, but I'm a real believer of this kid. Has got a Patrick Kane-like ability to play make. I think he's super skilled. His shooting percentage is really low right now. I think it's at 4% at the NCAA level. And, obviously that, good scores and good elite scores are usually around 10 to 11. If you're playing in the junior ranks or college, anywhere from 12 to 15. So there's going to be some, regression to the mean here. I think there's a lot of time. I have a lot of time for James Higgins. I actually think he's just as talented, if not even more talented than Macklin Celebrini. And to me, he's far and away the one. He probably will be my runaway one unless something major happens. I really love his overall game skill set. Tremendous player all around. Logan Hensler. I haven't really talked about Logan Hensler on the podcast that much, but Logan Hensler, to me, I do not agree with the consensus on him. I don't see him as a first-round pick. Is he a great skater? Absolutely. Does he impact the game offensively? Not as much as I would like. He's really at the USH level. He's been very average. I don't know that he has this upper top 4 game that everybody seems to think he has. Does he have the frame to play in the National Hockey League? Absolutely. Does he have the ability to, skate himself out of trouble? He certainly does. But I don't see this offensive game that people seem to think he has. Usually you see the production a little bit more out of these players that are USHL, players and stuff, and it's not, the level is just not there for me to consider him to be a first round pick. I actually have him probably in my back half of my second round. I don't know that he deserves to have a first round grade, in my opinion. A darling of the public scouting communities next, Lyndon Lakovich, playing for Moose Jaw. He is 6 point. They say 6'4.25". I think he's closer to 6'5". On this kid, really good skating ability at that size. Should be really interesting to see his game develop through his draft year, but he's been a guy who I've had a few years of watching him. He's really up and down for me. I don't know if I feel comfortable putting him in my first round just yet. I think his upside could lead you to put him in the first round. I wouldn't have a question of people putting him in the first round. I get why Central Scouting's rating him here, especially with the performance he had at the USA CHL Challenge. It should be really interesting to see where his progression goes through the season. Brady Martin is a guy who is a coach's dream. Really good skater. He had a massive OHL Cup last year. Has really come into the OHL, and he's had a little bit of a struggle, but he's really starting to acclimate here in the last month or so. Very likable kid. I like his skating. I like how tough he is. He really engages himself in the corners. I look at him to be a really, he's got like a Tyler Bertuzzi like motor and effort to his game. And it should be really interesting to see where he goes from here, because a lot of his skill set is very, NHL ready. It's just a matter of finding his game and getting that offense to come into his game. And Once he finds that, I think he's gonna find himself in the first round. I don't have him there right now. Porter Martone to me is the guy who I think is the closest to challenging James Higgins for number one overall. I've really grown to like Porter Martone a lot. A big kid, good frame, a really great shot, and a good scorer. Just a lot to like with him. I think he's done an excellent job leading Brampton. Putting on over 2 points a game at the OHL level as a draft eligible, which is pretty unbelievable. Puts you up there with the elite company that has come through in the last 10 years out of these draft cycles. And I have a lot of time for Porter Martone. Just brings a lot to his game, and you want him to develop more into a power forward. In my opinion, I think he's got more ability to give and more ability to be a lot more physical. But there's a lot to like with Porter. He brings a total package to the game, really dominant in the junior cycle right now, and just a real solid asset in a really strong OHL class. Then you move on to Roger McQueen, another big guy listed here at 6'5" and a quarter. I think personally closer to 6'6". Roger McQueen's a guy who is got a ton of potential. A really big kid who still looks like he's like 15 years old. In his face, he looks like a young kid. But a massive body and a great skater. The offensive touches come through at the Western Hockey League level. He's been a really important piece for the Brandon Wheat Kings. Obviously, being a center is going to bring his upside up quite a bit. This is a kid who cannot fall past the top 10. He just won't fall at that level at all. I have him right now at 7. I think it's a little bit lower than a lot of scouts in the industry probably have him. I like his game a lot. I don't have any qualms about him. I just don't think, based on the other prospects I see in this class, I don't know that he has that much of an advantage over these guys in talent other than just being bigger. So there's some things to work on with Roger's game. And, I think defensively he could use a little bit of work. I think, his game, he could stand to be a lot more demonstrative at the junior level. So there's some growth there that still has to happen, but he's a guy you can honestly put your hat on and know that he's a dependable player at the junior level. Michael Misa right now is my 2. Had a really, like Porter, has had a really good year for Saginaw. Obviously has really raised his stock since the Memorial Cup. I think he's been, I have him and Porter like 1A, 1B for me right now, with Misa being my 1A and Porter being my 1B for the OHL kids. A really strong class this year. Michael to me shouldn't fall out of the top 5. Just a really good skater. Super smart offensively. He doesn't panic. He play makes, and rarely do you ever see him make a mistake, but he's not also, somebody who's timid in the offensive zone. He definitely looks for opportunities and finds ways to score goals and get to where he needs to on the ice. There's a lot to like with his game and his overall skill set as well. Then you got William Moore. William Moore, to me, I don't think there's any kid out of the National Development Program that is a first-round candidate, in my opinion. The only person that I would have as a fringe right now is LJ Mooney, who you're going to see probably later in this. I have LJ like 13 or 14 on my board, but I also think there's a big drop off after 12 this year. I think he's one of the better best of the rest candidates, but at 5'6" and 140 pounds, it's very hard to make the National Hockey League at that size. But William Moore is a good player. I think he's more of a second round grade in my opinion, but has a lot of projectability. Good skater, really responsible defensively, good shot. Has been a leader for the under 17 and now under 18 program now for the last couple of years. He's going to go to play at Boston College next year. Going to have an opportunity to really lead them and be a really important player. And, his floor is very high. I think, he's going to make the National Hockey League. That's not the question. It's a matter of how much can he do once he hits the National Hockey League. And there's a lot to consider with that. So, Williams got some fringe development there. I think, teams that like safe picks are going to take this kid in the first round. I personally don't have him as a first round grade right now. I don't think he has shown me to be a first rounder. and I'll be curious to see what happens with him going forward. Radim Maturka, that's another guy who, to me, he's on here because he's big. I'll be honest. I don't think he brings a first round anything to the table. I would argue he's a mid round pick in my opinion. But the scouts love size, right? And to me, nobody knew who Radim Maturka was before 6 months ago. Now all of a sudden he's on first round grades and all this stuff because he's 6'6" and can skate and plays in a pro league as an 18-year-old. I don't love that. That's the mentality. He's gonna have a similar rise to like a Salayev, in my opinion. I don't know that I agree with that either. I'm gonna put out a video here in the next couple weeks. Kids that are 6'6", 6'7", these big defensemen, they don't turn out, and they never do turn out because they don't have the athletic skill set to match their size, and they end up just being bottom pairing defensemen. That's just, you look at Nikita Triamkin, you look at Logan Stanley, you look at Boris Volabik. You can look through the years and that Christian Kudrow, all sorts of big defensemen at 6'7", 6'8", that didn't have the translatability because they didn't have athletic games and they didn't have high offensive outputs. I look at him as another person like that. So buyer beware with Radim Maturka. No, Maturka, sorry. And then going into, I'm going to get into a few more of these guys. I'll skip a few here. One guy who I'm really high on is Cole Reshny. I actually debated having Cole in my top 3. Cole has scored at every level, is really, really amazing at producing at every level that he's ever been at. Despite being a smaller guy, he just finds ways to be smart. His hockey IQ is off the charts. His shot is really impressive. One of the better shots in the draft, in my opinion. Skating could use some work, but he's not bad. Just a lot to like with Cole. I think he's super translatable. I look at him to be like a Braden Point type player. I think he's got that kind of impact. And, I think a lot of teams will be kicking themselves if they don't take this kid in the top 8. I can't see him falling past 8. I have him aggressively ranked at 4. I even thought about putting him at 2. I like his game that much. And I think there's a lot to like there. And he's going to be a guy who you look back in 3 or 4 years and you wonder about the upside of these guys. He, to me, has one of the higher upsides in this draft. Ivan Ryabkin's another guy who he's playing at the junior level in Russia. Has also gotten some KHL and VHL time as well. You put him in a class. If you compare him to the Russian prospects the last few years, personally, I had Michkov being the best of the group, then Demidov. I would put Ryabkin third after those two. Ivan is going to be a top 10 pick. I think, the skills are there, the skating's there, the size is there. I think people just worry about the translatability, and I think they know he's going to need a little bit more time. I think that's why the move was, rumored to be made for him to go to Muskegon. They wanted him to have the opportunity to grow and develop in his game. Ivan's going to have that, ability to adjust to a North American rink at some point in time. Whether or not he ever does come to Muskegon should be interesting. But if he stays in Russia, he's going to have to learn to just really dominate, really get into his skill set and his ability and just find his opportunity. And then 2 more guys I'm going to mention here is Jackson Smith. To me, everybody has Matt Schaefer being the top-ranked defenseman, and I think Jackson Smith, to me, is the most underrated player in this draft. Jackson Smith is just outside my top 10 right now. I personally think this kid has it all. Great skater, good offensive ability, a really nice shot. And when I'm talking about a good skater, I mean, this guy is a plus skater, one of the better junior skaters I've seen in a very long time. Being that he's a big kid, being that he's already mobile, being that he's very physical as well. He's a can't miss top pairing defenseman, in my opinion. And I think the industry's got to catch up with him. I think he's really super skilled. I think he's a very talented player in his own right. And a lot of teams are going to be kicking themselves if they miss him at the draft board. Then going on to Malcolm Spence is another guy as well that I think there's a lot of time for him. Another guy who I definitely have in my first round. There's no reason why he shouldn't be in anybody's first round. Super safe player, good skill, very determined in corners, scores a lot of dirty goals. Very likable. I guess an incredibly high character kid. I've listened to a few interviews of him. Very well spoken. Just a really great example of what it means to be a good humble prospect. I got all of the time in the world. He's extremely draftable, and I think all 32 teams would consider a guy like Malcolm Spence. My people might want my thoughts on Mr. Matt Schaefer. I've caught clips of him. I have yet to actually catch a game of his, if I'm being honest. I've caught more of Malcolm because he played the under 18s. With Matt Schaefer, I did catch some clips of him. I love his skating. I think he's an excellent skater. I like that he can puck handle really well. I just need to see more from him before I feel really comfortable ranking him. I don't know. I just haven't really caught in the games that I have caught of him. I don't know that I've gotten the true sense of who Matt Schaefer is. But I really like the skating. I really like the skill. I like the ability to break up the puck. I think he can manage a power play really well. I do need to see more in the defensive game, but it's not necessarily because he doesn't have it. It's just because I haven't really gotten the viewings I would like on him. He'll be a guy I'm definitely going to watch out for, especially now that he made the World Junior Camp roster. If he ends up making the World Junior team, I think this is going to be a massive showcase for Matt Schaefer. And a lot of people already really like him. A lot of people are even saying he could challenge at one. Should be really interesting to see where he goes. But there's a lot to like there with Matt Schaefer and his game and his ability as well. We're going to get into some other prospects here. I'm going to go a little bit down the line. I'm just going to note, so B prospects are second round grade guys, according to Central Scouting. I'm going to go ahead and talk about a few of these guys. I'm not going to go crazy into a lot of this, but I'm going to talk about a few of my favorites here. One guy in particular is Pyotr Andrianov. I think he's the top rated goalie, or pretty close to the top rated goalie. In the industry right now. Yes, he's a little smaller at 6 foot and 200 pounds, but he's been excellent at the junior level in Russia, and went and played in a lot of international tournaments, and it's been very impressive there as well. So he's got a bit of a character issue. He's had some incidents in his past, in terms of when they accepted medals, he wasn't very classy in the response to that. And borderline, had some issues with that as well. But there's a lot to be curious about with Pyotr. I think he's got an excellent glove hand. I think his mobility is super impressive. Obviously, in order to have a 940 save percentage at the NHL level, you have to be a pretty good goaltender, and really manage the shots you're getting. Obviously, he's playing in a powerhouse with CSKA Moscow, but there's a good goalie in here, and I think somebody you're going to definitely want to watch out for. Another guy who I got a lot of time for is Adam Banach, who is the Czech forward who moved on to the USHL this year, playing for Youngstown. Listed generously at 5'7", $160. This is a kid who makes with the best of them. Him and LJ Mooney, to me, are two of my personal loves in terms of their overall ability. They're very similar. I think Mooney's got a little more game to him than Banach does, but Banach is not nearly far behind in terms of his game as well. Has really had a difficulty in adjusting to the pro level, hence the need for him to go to the USHL. You got a long-term project here in Banach, but if you love the upside, he's going to be a really interesting player for you going forward. And the teams that will like him will really like him. Emil Guite is another guy who I think, I have a lot of time for. A really good scorer. He's had a bit of a down year this year, but he was so good last year that I have a hard time not keeping him in my first round right now. Obviously, the Central Scouting Bureau thinks that he should be at a lower level. It depends on what you think and your thoughts on him. But, this is a kid with an excellent shot, good offensive awareness, a really good skater. And people think he's really small, but, he's measured here at 6'1" and a quarter. He plays smaller, I think, than his size would indicate, but he's still a really impressive athlete. And a guy who's a younger player in this draft. There's a lot of projectability for him, and a guy who I think is going to rise, going into the second half of the year. Lube Hermstam is a goalie, has really struggled at the under 20 level for Skellefteå. Skellefteå isn't really the strongest team At that level, they're kind of more. I've heard them compare more to an under 18 team as opposed to an under 20 team this year in terms of their overall talent ability. So he's really struggled, and now he's the de facto starter after Casper Ruud has since left and gone to another kid who's I don't think he's eligible this year, but he's a really talented player in his own right. A guy you would look at and potentially could draft at some point in this year's draft. And then you get into his game. I think he's just really fallen off. There's a really good talented goalie in there. He's just got to find his game and his ability going into next year and going forward into the rest of this year even. Jack Ivankovic, another goalie who I have a lot of time for. Andreoff and Ivankovic are my two top-rated goalies for this year. Really like their overall game and skill set. I think they bring a lot to the table. Jack's, again, 5'11", and another shorter goalie, but this is a kid who is very mobile, super quick, great reflexes, very smart too, very calm and composed in that. Doesn't overly panic, very fluid within his movements. It's a lot to like with him. He's a very well-coached goalie, somebody who takes on a lot of different things and is very smart and cerebral in the way he attacks and manages his crease. He finds his angles really well. If you get beat by him, to me, he's, if UC Saros can make it in the National Hockey League, guys like Andreanoff and Jack Ivankovic can find their way too. Then you go into some other guys. Ben Kavan is another guy who I have in my first round. I have Ivankovic and Andreanoff and Guite also in my first round as well. So hence the reason I mentioned them. Ben Kavan is a guy who a lot of time for him, brings a lot of really good ability to the game, and he's got a good shot. I don't know if his skating is the best. He's going to have a lot of work to do there, but there's a real player in him. Good chance that he's going to go and really impact himself at Arizona State. They have him rated in 2026 here for him to go into college. I think he could potentially even go next year. I think he's ready to do that. But he's going to have to really develop another long-term project, though, that you're going to have to look at and really get a good perspective on. I talked about LJ Mooney already here. John Mooney, the 5'7", 162. To me, the best player in the under-18 program for the National Development Program. Just unbelievable skill set. Really, really elusive, really fast, super smart on pucks. He's just really small. You take a chance on a guy who's 5'7", 162. You hope he doesn't have the Aaron Krivijarhu effect and slides down into the 4th or 5th round. Could I see it happening? Absolutely. Do I think it's fair that it would happen to him? Absolutely not. It wasn't fair when Aaron got dropped to the 4th round. Certainly won't be fair if LJ does too. But LJ is definitely a guy with a top 10 mind. He's got a top 10, arguably even top 5 skill set in this draft. Just a really big issue with his size. And you could argue the same thing for Adam Benach as well. And then one other guy I'm going to talk about here is Owen Martin. Owen is in my first round right now. He's in the danger of moving into my second round. I like his game. I think a lot of teams are going to like him late because he's super smart. Him and Brady Martin, sharing the same likeness, but also are very similar players. I like Owen a little bit more than Brady right now. I think both of them are going to be similar skill sets, guys that you can plug in your lineup eventually, and they're, when they hit their peak of their careers, they're going to get anywhere from 40 to 60 points in the National Hockey League. I have a lot of time for those players, and those guys usually land in the first round more often than not. Another B-ranked prospect, Cameron Reed, is a really good defensive prospect as well. I have a lot of time for him. Really smart skater, plays in a really good program in Kitchener that's developed a lot of National Hockey League players, good size, really good skater as well. Offensively, pretty gifted, very good playmaker, very good at producing from the point. Also is a really good penalty killer. Another guy who I think is definitely, a top 4 defenseman, no question. May even find himself in the top pair in the right situation, but a lot to like with his game as well. And then we move on to the C-ranked prospects. These are guys that are supposed to be mid-round picks. Other guys I'll talk about here, Anthony Elaine Samake is another defenseman, a late-born kid. He's 5 days away from being eligible for 2026. But this is a kid with plus skating again. Really super elusive, very good, very smart hockey player. Good ability to manage himself in corners and bad situations. He doesn't force anything. He just manages his game really well. Very good at controlling the offensive zone, but also very responsible defensively. Good at managing his gaps. A little bit of a smaller defenseman. I look at him similar to a Sam Girard. He's listed at 6'1". When I last saw him, he was probably about 5'9", 5'10". But he's really shot. Obviously, he must have shot up the last little bit. And if he's gotten taller and he really is that size, he's going to move up a lot of draft boards. I could definitely see him falling into the second round. And probably some teams that really like him are going to put him in their first round and give him a really good, a pretty high grade for being a really good player. And then we'll go into some other players here that are you guys that I would like to talk about. We've got Arvid Drott is a guy who he's listed here as a fourth, fifth round candidate. To me, Arvid Drott is a super safe player. Your meat and potatoes, really good grindy player, but can provide some offense as well. You're looking at a player like an Andre Palat. You're looking like a Richard Panik, that kind of style of player that gets under your skin, pretty aggressive, but still has some offensive touch. I have a lot of time to talk about Arvid. I think he's super talented. Again, Djurgården's got a really good under 20 and young pros that have entered within their system, and they're going to have probably 5 or 6 guys drafted out of Djurgården, just based on Eklund, based on Frundell, based on Arvid, and then there's a few other guys that I might get into in a little bit here that I have a lot of time for. A guy who's really proven himself an overager is Christian Epperson. Obviously a product of Shattuck St. Mary, has now moved on to the USHL to kind of get the OHL to get his footing and his skill set, and he's really developed well in Saginaw. Definitely a guy who I think can, probably going to be one of the top-ranked overagers in this draft. I think he'll be a guy who is absolutely going to get selected. Whether it's second or fourth round, I'm not sure, but he's definitely going to find himself in the top 90 of a lot of people's boards. And that's a huge credit to him and his ability to play the game as well. Moving on to some other guys here that I want to talk about. Victor Klingsell, I have a lot of time for him as well. Another Skellefteå player, 5'10" and $180. Super skilled kid. He had an unbelievable Ivan Holinka tournament. Was one of the leading scorers in the tournament. Brought a great game, super smart on power plays, didn't force passes, just went about his business the right way. A lot of time for a guy like Victor Klingsell. I think he just brings a ton to the table, and there's just so much skill and so much ability to play make and make smart decisions with Victor Klingsell that personally I have him late in the first round. A lot of people have him closer to the fourth. I don't think that's fair, and he'll be a guy who he'll shoot up boards, in my opinion. Going on to some other guys who have gone in here. Viggo Nordland's another guy. I have a lot of time for Viggo. Similar player to Victor Klingsell. Both of them have played, they're line mates of each other. Similar mindsets. Obviously, both of them have produced well because the other has produced well. Another guy to watch for going into the draft as well. And then moving on to some other guys here that I can talk about. Let's see here. Theo Stakselius is another guy from Djurgården. I think he's gonna find his way this year. We're going to keep going here. There's some other prospects that I can look at, give you some good perspectives on. Jackson Crowder is a guy who I think, could be a late riser as well. Good player, just production needs to come in a little bit more. Michael Eriksson, the Norwegian. Norway's going to have a lot of really good, talented players again this year as well. Michael with somebody who, again, another younger player in this draft, is actually closer to being a 2026 draft eligible. Only missing the deadline by 2 days. So there's a really good player in him as well. Went home to Norway, got kind of homesick, found his game again, came back to Sweden this year. It's just been a house of fire throughout the year so far. And then we're going to keep going on here. Another kid who I think this kid is the most underrated goalie. Nobody's talking about this kid is Roberto Leonardo Henriquez. This is a Slovakian Cuban dual national player. Okay, 6'1" and about $190. Watching this kid's game, he is so fluid and he's so acrobatic. He's so in charge of his crease. Criminally underrated player here. The fact that he's a W grade is insane to me. I think Henriquez, to me, outside of Andreyanov and Ivankovic, he's my third ranked goalie right now. He's easily a second or third round grade for me right now. I have a lot of time for this kid. The fact that nobody's talked about this kid in the scouting industry is insane to me. Yes, he's playing in the NAL, which is a little bit different. You know, the North American Hockey League, though, has produced really good players. Obviously, Connor Hellebuyck came from there. You look at him and what he's done the last couple of years. He's obviously won a couple of Veznas, been a really important player for Winnipeg this year. Has been arguably, you could argue, he should have a shot at the league MVP this year, just based on how good he's played. And Roberto Leonardo Henriquez, it's just an unbelievable story. A really talented player as well, and I got a lot of time for the scouts that really recognize how good of a player he is, because he brings it, and he brings it a lot. And then Tommy Lafreniere is a guy who has come on a lot. Tanner Lamb, another guy, Aiden Lane. There's some other guys to just watch out for. I'm not going to get too in the weeds here. Thank you for your following along here. Talking about this. So I'm going to stop sharing here, and I'm going to go and share my draft board instead, so you guys can see my ranks. So obviously I talked about James Higgins being my 1, Misa being my 2, Martone being 3, Rushney 4, Frundell, Eklund, McQueen, Ryabkin, Spence. Then we got Denoyers, Jackson Smith, Jacob East Wozniak. I'll talk about him for a little bit. This is a kid who's very interesting to watch his growth and development in his game. I think a really good scorer when he's at his upside, though. He's got like an Alex Holtz similarity to him in terms of a really good shot, good offensively, but does he care enough defensively to be an impactful player and a top talent? I have him a little bit lower than what I had Holtz back in the day, but I think he's a guy who is a mid-first round pick. Could slip to the second, maybe, if a team doesn't, if teams find out something about him. I think he could slip a little bit. But he's the top ranked guy who I haven't talked about here. I got a lot of time for. It should be really interesting where he goes from here for the rest of this. And then obviously I talked about LG Mooney, Ben Cavan, Emil Guite, Viggo Nordland, and Arvid Dratz. So there's my top 17. And I talked about Ivankovic and Aiden Lane. Itu Arpana is a guy who's playing at the under 18 level. I have him at that rank, not as a firm thing. I actually am very close to taking him off. I really liked his game before the year, and he's really regressed for me. I don't see a first round grade for him right now. I don't know that he won't find himself in the later rounds just based on what he's done this year, but he was a guy who was very bullish on before the year, and has led to some different things. So talked a lot about the defensemen in this draft, a lot about the goalies, a lot about the forwards. 25 to me is a pretty average draft. It's a very good placeholder draft to compare to different drafts. You got a lot of everything in here. You got some good defensemen. You got great goaltenders. You got really good forwards. When you're looking at BPA, You just look for the talent and just try and find the most upside talent. And I think that's going to ultimately lead to how the draft positioning is going to go going into the next little bit here. Should be really interesting to see where we go from here and see what happens. So finally, I'm going to go into one last thing. I'm going to go into the D1, D3, A, and B tournaments. So the D1A tournament, I'm going to talk a little bit about. We got France and Norway. So let's get into what's going on in this tournament. The 1A group starts December 9th. You have Austria, Denmark, France, Hungary, Norway, and Slovenia. Obviously, a really competitive division. 2 players have already got their rosters settled, with France and Norway. So let's go ahead and load their rosters up here. I'm going to share France's roster first. So you look at France. Their goaltending is a little bit weak. Morten Nakash, I should say, sorry, is likely to be the starter, and I think Dorofeyev is going to be the backup for this group. Defensively, nobody that really super stands out. It's interesting that the 08 made the team here in Pauline Hostin. Very rare to see that, especially at the 1A level. So obviously I'll be very intrigued to watch his game and grow. The strength of this team, in my opinion, is in the forwards. Looking at a guy like Hugo Nogueirado, I think Robinson Dijon is a guy who has played at higher levels. A guy who I had ranked last year is Arthur Delvalle. A lot of time for him and Matisse Chouapi. All of these guys are really high-end offensive players who are going to be counted upon as leaders. You're going to have to find the opportunity, and then you look at younger guys like Noah Sansa-Kitala, who's Belgian and French dual nat, and then Mathis Dufour, who plays in the BCHL for Brooks. France has got a decent roster here. I'd be very curious to see where they go from here and what kind of talent they're going to have going into the tournament. But I would have to think this team is going to, potentially avoid relegation. I think they're going to find their way, and I think they're going to be better than a team like Slovenia or Hungary, for example. They may finish in 4th, but we'll see, and I'll do a little bit more preview going into the next couple of weeks once the rosters come out. Moving on to Norway now. They have an NCAA goalie who's going to lead this tournament, and Martin Holtet Lundberg. I believe he plays for Michigan Tech, if I remember correctly. And sorry, not Michigan Tech, Fair State. He's the starter there. He's had interesting numbers. Defensively, this is a really strong group. Obviously led by Stian Solberg is the guy who's going to be leading the charge for this group. But then you have other players. Another guy who got drafted, Ludvig Lofton. And, some other players have played in high end in Sweden. They've gone on to play college hockey, different things like that. Should be really interesting to see where these kids grow and develop and where they come in their games. But I think defensively, they're a very above average squad for this D1A level. And then the forward group is really where it's at. They got a phenom in Nicholas Armolson, who to me right now is a top 10 pick in the 26 draft. Like a really super impressive kid that has come out of Norway, who I think he's got a higher upside than even a Brandzeg Nygaard, who has really shown that obviously Norwegians can go and be first-round picks. I think he's got that much more game to him. A lot of time to talk about him. Another guy I think is going to get drafted is Michael Eriksson. He's going to find himself. I have him in my fringe second, high second round range right now. I think he might be closer to 3rd maybe before the end of the year, but lots to like there. Strome Vatne is an excellent player, a shorter guy who I think should have been drafted, the last couple years now. Last year he should have been drafted. I think this year he's a really good overage candidate, especially if he has a big tournament here. A lot to like there, along with Nias Mir, another big kid as well. That's going to bring a lot of skill and potential to this group and roster. A lot to like there with Norway as well. So it'll be interesting to see where we go with those players from here. And I'm sure there's going to be more candidates you're going to like out of that group, but I'll get more into that in a future video. So we're going to move on here to the Division 3A rosters so far that have been released. So that would be Norway and, not Norway, Mexico and New Zealand. So let's go ahead and get in here. So the rosters out of this would be Bosnia, Bulgaria, the Chinese Taipei, Mexico, New Zealand, and Turkey. To me, Turkey is the favorite out of this group. They don't have the roster yet. I will talk a little bit more about that and some upcoming stuff. I might even do a separate show for each of these, short thing that just talks about, previewing each of these players. So going into New Zealand's roster here, not a lot of intel for me in terms of, obviously you got a guy who's playing USHL Premier at 19, which, is nothing to shake your head at. Defensively, they're a bit inexperienced. They don't really have the high-end players you would expect out of that group. And then, the big guys I think to watch for out of this roster are Jacob Carey is a guy who's been at this tournament 2 or 3 years now. A guy you can definitely look at and say he's going to be a guy that's going to be thought upon to lead this group. Another guy you're going to really want to put attention to is Joel Patterson, the young kid, the under 18 player as well. He'll be a guy who will find his opportunity and be a leader of the young guys in this group. I would expect New Zealand here to be pretty close to the back half of the group, potentially even going into relegation. And then looking at Mexico has got more of a loaded roster than I'm used to. We look at some guys that have really come out of play here. Santiago Kukari will likely be the starter. But then the fact that they have a 6'4", 16-year-old in Justin Sosa, I got to get more information on this kid. Playing at the under 17 level in Canada, at the CSHL, the academy level, is really impressive. Should be interesting to see what he does at the 3A level. I think he'd be a really dominant player at that level. Going into the defensive core, 2 guys I want to really mention here. Jack Wilson is a guy who plays in Junior B here in Canada, and should be really interesting to see what he does as an 07. And the other kid I really like is the young 08, Nicholas Lorenzana. This is a kid who, if he can grow a little bit, he might have an opportunity to sneak into some pro leagues here when he peaks at his top end. I don't think he's an NHL guy, but he's definitely a guy who, when I watch him play, he's super smart. He brings a lot of good skill and potential into the group. Really like his overall skill set and mindset, and I think there's a lot of potential that he brings to the table. And he might be potentially the first Mexican pro defenseman to ever play in North American professional hockey. And then some other guys I want to mention here. The big guy, in my opinion, is Luis Valencia, the 06 born kid. I think he brings a lot to the table. Has played in North America for a long time. I think he'll be counted upon as the big leader of this group. Should be really interesting to see where he goes and how he grows this group. And I think they're gonna find themselves in the middle of the pack here during this tournament. It should be really interesting to watch them in the 3A tournament as well. And then finally, I'm going to get into the last 2 rosters here. These are the 3. This is the D3B. So this is a shorter tournament. You got Kyrgyzstan, Luxembourg, South Africa, and Thailand. I'm going to talk a little bit about South Africa's under-20 team and the Thailand under-20 team as well, starting with the South African under-20 team. Looking at their group, I don't have much on this group, as much as I would like. But there's 2 kids who I want to point out that are very impactful players, I think, for this group going into this tournament. One is Santino Goniwe, a little bit of a shorter guy playing at the academy level at the under 18s as a 16-year-old, finding himself in North America. Should be really interesting to see where his game goes. And then one of the younger kids in the tournament, Jacob Bate, playing at the under 17 level as well, but in the normal AAA program, not necessarily the academy program for the Scholastic Hockey League. But Jake is a guy who is going to come into this 3B tournament and be counted upon even as a leader at 15 years old. There's a lot to like with his game, a lot of skill, a lot of development he's going to have, but he's going to have to bring it, especially being North American. It's very hard to find players that have gone and done the things that he's done. And then going into Thailand's roster, You see the league there as the Siam Hockey League. That is their professional hockey league in Thailand. So you have a lot of these kids who are playing professional hockey already for them. It should be really interesting to see what happens with those people. But one guy who I'm really surprised is not on this roster, who was the guy I was going to preview and talk about, is Chinapat Intihaj. Has been a very impressive player. Really done a ton of interesting things internationally, especially at the Asian challenges and the Asian tournaments. He's been really dominant. And as an 07, I thought he would have been in this group. Obviously, they felt the need to bring an older group. This is a group that's going to fight for relegation. I know that for a fact. I just think they just don't have the skills and the ability to kind of go and find their way here. So they're going to just try and do the best they can in this tournament and try and go from there. But I think there's a lot to give with those players as well. So, I'll talk a little bit more about some different players going into the next little bit here. I don't have any questions, obviously, right now in the chat. But if you guys, thank you for those that have stayed on and listened. If you have any questions about the international tournaments coming up, I'm probably going to do another live stream here in the next week or two. Might even be less than that. Would love to hear your thoughts and feedback on, these different international rosters, what your thoughts are on the different divisions. We're going to have some World Junior rosters coming out here in the near future. We're going to have the World Junior A Challenge to talk about. We're going to have more central scouting stuff, I'm sure, will come out, obviously after the World Juniors. That'll probably be more of a January topic. But you're going to see a lot of different things that are going to be coming out of the woodworks here in December and January. It's a very important year in the hockey calendar. So if you are not following along on YouTube, please do so. Again, it's Hidden Hockey Podcast. If you like this content, please subscribe. I want to grow this group. I want to grow this ability to kind of get more people chatting. It's been unbelievable to see. I have 175 subscribers. I'd like to get to over 200 by the end of the year. It would be awesome. So please share it along with your other hockey insanely crazed friends. Keep it out there. Keep pushing my content. I'd love to engage with each and every one of you and really get an understanding of, where we're at in terms of if there's popularity within the niches of hockey, which I know there is. So please share it with the appropriate people. Again, for those that have stayed on, thank you very much. I will end it here. And again, follow me on Instagram, follow me on Twitter, follow me here on YouTube. I will be posting more with community chats, more videos coming in the near future about women's hockey, about some different topics with international hockey, and potentially the impact, more videos on the impact of this new ruling with the NCAA and the CHL and how that impacts all the other leagues. Maybe getting more into that. Maybe digging a little bit deeper with some different testimony from some experts as well. As always, thanks for tuning into the content. Appreciate you all very much. We'll see you next time.